Hello, this is Amin and you are watching session 5 of ASP.NET Core MVC tutorial. In this tutorial, we use the latest released version of ASP.NET, which is .NET 5 at time of recording this video. In this session, we are going to talk about main method in program class, that is start point of our application. I will show you how our project starts and what is going on at runtime. Then I describe a startup class and talk about its important methods. Also, this session includes hosting method and going to detail of in-process and out-of-process hosting model, and I explain what they are and how you can use both in your project. We are going to talk about main method. As I mentioned, main method is a start point of ASP.NET Core and ASP.NET 5 web application. If you are familiar with ASP.NET, know main method and program class are part of console application. Initially, ASP.NET Core web application is console application that turned to web application during runtime process. Now you can see the structure of program class. It's look like console application. It has main method. Main method is a start point of this application, and when this application executed, main method automatically as a start point will call, and when the main method will execute, CreateHostBuilder method will call within the main method. You can see CreateHostBuilder method immediately after main method, which contains another method, CreateDefaultBuilder method, which is part of host class. This piece of code create hosting environment of your application, and it create hosting based on default configuration. And as you can see, CreateDefaultBuilder has another method, which is ConfigureWebHostDefaults, and with lambda expression option of web builder will call a startup class. We discuss a startup class in detail later. A startup class is one of more important part of your web application, which configure services of your application, and also will configure and manage pipeline of your application. It's control requests and responses of your application, and we can see startup class in this video, and we discuss about these two important method in detail, which is configure services and configure method. Both are located in a startup class. Let's see a startup class. You can right click on a startup in program and go to definition of a startup, and you can see a startup.cs file, which is located in your project, and it has two void method, configure services. As I mentioned, it's controlling configuration of services that are using in your application, and configure method is controlling pipeline of your application. We are going to detail of these two methods in the coming videos. Okay, let's talk about hosting. We have two type of hosting model in ASP.NET Core and ASP.NET 5, in process and out of process. You can set the default hosting model in project file that we talk about that one in session 4 of this video series. In this file, if you mention in ASP.NET hosting model in process, your application hosting will be in process. And if you mentioned ASP.NET Core hosting model out of process in your project file, your project will be hosted out of process. Let's see this line of code in Visual Studio. This is the project file of our project that we created in previous session. We can add ASP.NET Core hosting model in property group box. Let me add this code, ASP.NET Core hosting model. And if you mention in process in this box of code, your application will be hosted in process, which is IIS or IIS Express. Or if you mention out of process, the hosting of your application will be Kestrel. If it is a little bit confusing, don't worry. I'm talking about detail of in process and out of process and Kestrel in this video. I want to show you how you can set your hosting model in your project file. As we understand how we can set our hosting model in our project file, let's talk more about difference between in process and out of process hosting model. In process hosting model, which is really faster than out of process, we have just one web server, which can be IIS or IIS Express. In actual deployment, IIS Express is not available, and IIS Express is a built-in IIS version for Visual Studio. But in actual deployment environment, we have IIS as a web server. If we set our project in process and we deploy our project in IIS, we benefit of higher speed performance. But in out of process, we have two scenarios that I'm talking about the scenarios in this video. But we can have one web server which would be Kestrel, or we can have Kestrel as internal web server and have one reverse proxy server as a bridge between client and our application. As if you want to know what is Kestrel, Kestrel is a web server which is built in ASP.NET Core and ASP.NET 5. It's cross-platform, and you can use it as Edge web server, and you can deploy your application on Kestrel. There is scenarios of hosting for ASP.NET Core and ASP.NET 5 application. If we set our hosting model in process, we have one web server which is IIS, and its process name is W3WP. The client through internet communicate with our application via the IIS web server, and the users send their request to IIS, and IIS communicate with our application and respond to their request of users in this model. But if we set our application out of process hosting model, we can have Kestrel as web server, and it is somehow same as in process if we want to compare these scenarios. But another scenario of out of process is using Kestrel as internal web server and our application host by Kestrel, but client and user doesn't have a direct communication with or internal web server, and they send their request to reverse proxy server, which can be IIS, Apache, or Nginx. Then reverse proxy server send or request to Kestrel or internal web server, and internal web server communicate with our application, and then the response will send back to reverse proxy server, and reverse proxy server send the response to a user. In this scenario, as we can expect, the speed and the performance decrease a little bit because we have one reverse proxy server between the process. But it has some benefit that encourage us to use this scenario when we set our project out of process, because in reverse proxy server, same as IIS, Apache, or Nginx, we can set several layers of firewall and security measure, which is not possible in Kestrel. And also another feature that can improve our performance and encourage us to use reverse proxy server in out of process is load balancing. Load balancing is one of feature that can balance the request of user which is available in IIS and Apache. That's why we can select the second scenario when we use out of process because of the benefit that I mentioned. But generally, in process hosting model is faster than out of process hosting model. We will show you these in process and out of process in Visual Studio and our application. But before talking about in process and out of process in Visual Studio, we can check our debug setting in our application. In project properties, we have debug setting, and we can set the environment which hosts our application. On Visual Studio, right click on your project name and select properties. And in properties, in the debug tab, you can see different profiles which can execute your application. there is 3 predefined profile: IIS Express and your application name, and WSL2, which is for Docker and container. IIS Express is a light version of IIS, and is just for Visual Studio development. And also the project name, which is here daily cast web application, is on .NET and Kestrel web server, and you can see app URL here. And if you run your application is available on the below app URL. And also you can add another profile and launcher. Now we try to add IIS as another profile. We click on new and set its name as IIS, and change the launcher name IIS. Just bear in mind, you should install IIS before doing this setting. And also you can see app URL in bottom of this screen, the URL that your application will be available on your local host and name of your application. But this profile is saved in launch setting.json file under properties folder. If you want to check the profile in the files that I said, you can open launch setting.json file, and there is the file, and there is 2 built-in and predefined profile, IIS, and name of your application and your project. And if I save this new profile, which is IIS, the new profile automatically generate in line setting.json file. Let's save it and check it again. Here you are. You can see IIS profile, and command name is IIS. And we try to run our application on IIS. We execute it with this profile. As this is first time that this profile is deployed to IIS, we receive this message, and we should restart Visual Studio for some permission. After restart will done, you can run your application now with IIS profile and IIS launcher. When you run your application, your developed application is available in the preset app URL. Here is localhost daily cast web application. Let's see it in browser. In browser, we type the URL that we set for IIS, and after running, you can see your application is running, and it's up now. Let's stop it, and we want to practically check in process and out of process. For receiving process name, you should write this piece of code in your application: system diagnostics, process, and current process. We go to a startup class, and in configure part, which control the pipeline of our application, we write down this code in this part that show us hello world. We replace this string with the code that show us the process name of our application, and the process which run our application: system diagnostics, process, and current get current process. And from this method, we run process name. With this piece of code, when we run our process, when we run our application, we can understand our host service and our launcher. Now we try to launch our program, our application with the Visual Studio command line. We run command line and we go to the folder of this project, which in my case is in D drive, projects folder, daily cast web application, and also daily cast web application. First one is the folder, and the second one is the folder that application is located in that one. First, we check this type of run project in process. If you write .NET-help, you can see the guideline of Visual Studio command line for .NET command. And if you want to run your application from command line, you should write .NET run while you are located in the application folder. And you can see our application is available in HTTP localhost port 5000. Let's check our project. And now we can see our process name is daily cast web application, and this is show us Kestrel is hosting our application when we run our project with command line and we are in process. Let's check it to out of process hosting model and run the project again. .NET run. Again, you can see our project is available with the same URL, HTTP localhost 5000. And when we refresh it, we can realize the result is same in both situation. And in both situation, Kestrel is hosting our application. But let's try in process while we run our project with IIS-Express. We set it to in process and run our project with IIS-Express. And now its process name is IIS-Express. Here, IIS-Express is our host. Let's change it to out of process and run. And realize the process name changed while we again start our project with IIS. I will describe this change in detail, but let's try to run our project in process with IIS this time. Let's check the profile to IIS and run the project. And let's go to the URL. You can see W3WP is the process name. The process name of IIS, as I mentioned in previous slide, is W3WP. And let's check out of process and running our project with IIS server. Let's refresh the page. And you can see this time is our process name is changed to Kestrel and name of project. What happened when we change our project hosting model to out of process and we run or process or application with IIS and IIS Express. In these two situations, IIS and IIS Express are acting as reverse proxy server, and our application is running on Kestrel, and you saw the application name as hosting process name, and IIS and IIS Express were acting as reverse proxy server, and on both situation we implement these scenario. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe our page and follow us in different social media.